Hi, my name's Georgia Henry, and really appreciate you joining me for the webinar today. It's a culture case study today around improving productivity and engagement. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Georgia Henry. I'm from Henry Reid, and we're an organisation culture consulting business. But previous to starting this business, my background is in corporate human resources, organisation design and development. And this case study is from a time before I started working in my own business and being a culture consultant. And it's important, I think, that I share it at this time because it really talks to a period of change and disruption in an organisation. And at the moment, we're going through such significant change and disruption that I wanted to share a real example of what I've worked through to be able to show you that when there is disruption and significant change, it is an ideal time to be looking at organisation culture and how to improve productivity and engagement. So change is not new, it happens all the time, but change on a significant global scale is something that not many organisations have experienced. This case study is around Nikon. Nikon is a Japanese-based global organisation, and I worked for the Australian subsidiary as the head of HR and internal services, and also as part of a global HR team looking after the Asia region. And we had 8 countries across the Asia region that I was responsible for through the global HR team. So Nikon Australia is a sales and distribution based organisation, but in my past experience, I've also had a lot of time working with organisations in the manufacturing area. So this case study focuses on productivity and engagement in that sales, corporate functions, distribution environment. If you're interested in finding out about improving productivity and engagement in a manufacturing environment, please reach out to me and let me know, and I would be happy to give you some insights into that. So first of all, I just want to set the scene. I want to talk to you a little bit about what was happening when just prior to me joining the company in January 2012. So Nikon is an old company. It started in 2017 in Tokyo, in Japan. In Australia, Nikon was founded in 2007. So Nikon products prior to Nikon Australia being founded as a subsidiary were sold through a distributor in Australia. So we had a background of being a distributor and then was founded as a subsidiary in 2007. Some other things that were happening in the world around that time, we had the introduction of the iPhone in 2007, and that really introduced the world to smart devices, phones with cameras, and a real change in the way that we started to look at technology. So previously, Nikon was known as really fantastic, high quality photography equipment. We joked a lot about people coming in and talking to us about cameras and saying, oh, my dad had a Nikon. And I must admit, that's probably one of the first things I said when I started working at Nikon Australia was, my dad had a Nikon. I had all my childhood photos were taken on a Nikon. So the whole landscape of photography and the markets that we operated in as a global organisation was starting to change because of the introduction of different technology. In 2010, we had this new phenomenon called Instagram, and you may wonder what the impact on that is on a company like Nikon. In 2012, I remember our marketing manager sharing with me that because of Instagram and the need to, or the desire to share photographs on social media and the use of smart devices, people were taking more photographs than ever before. And in fact, in 2012, in that 12-month period, more photographs were taken than had ever been taken in the whole of history up until that point in time. So we had such a huge focus on people wanting to take photographs and share photographs. And you'd think this would be a great thing for the imaging industry and a company like Nikon. But you see through the technology changes that smartphones and smart devices with the ability to share instantly to social media and to upload and edit really sort of took away from that more traditional view of photography. So in January 2011, we had some regulatory changes as well. The Trade Practices Act changed to the Australian Consumer and Competition Law. And this meant changes in the way that we had to interact with customers, manage returns, look at service levels. And so there was a regulatory requirements that were changing. In March 2011, you'll remember there was a large earthquake causing the tsunami, which resulted in the Fukushima disaster. The impact of this on Nikon globally was significant. In that area and the regions affected were the main hub of our glass manufacturers, raw material manufacturers, and finished product factories. Most of the Nikon product came from Japan and Thailand. And when you look at the devastation that happened in Japan in March 2011, it had a global impact on our ability to supply. You couple that with the floods in Thailand, also in 2011, which lasted actually from July through to December. And you look at the change in that global supply chain, then all of a sudden we no longer have we no longer have the ability to supply product. We have what we have in stock, but our supply chain is severely damaged. So big year. In September 2011, we also had the introduction of Kogan. Kogan went global, which meant that for the first time, consumers in Australia could purchase a genuine Nikon product outside of the constraints of the Australian market. And that brought into impacts on global pricing and global supply. So the impact on the retail industry around opening up or the ability for Australian consumers to now purchase genuine product outside of the Australian market was significant. And in December 2011 as well, we had the Australian Productivity Commission inquiry into the economic structure and performance of the Australian retail industry. So all of the retailers, for Nikon as a subsidiary, we distribute our product through retailers, through large retailers like Harvey Norman, JB Hi-Fi, Dick Smiths, as they still were around back then. But these organisations then had to look at their whole business model and the way that they actually engage with suppliers such as Nikon. So this sets the scene that over a period, particularly 2011, the whole business environment that we worked in shifted significantly. I started working with Nikon in Australia in January 2012. And so the challenges that we were facing from all of this disruption were quite significant. So my role when I started with Nikon Australia in 2012 was to establish the HR function and to change really change the experience of customers. So they wanted me to through our employees, change our customer experience to be one that was representative of a global prestige brand. So starting out with that sort of mandate, we really started to look at what the internal roadblocks and challenges. We knew all these things were happening externally, but to look internally, what we had started to highlight the real immensity, the immense challenge of being able to make significant change, to impact productivity and engagement. So some of the things were, we had an entrenched legacy of being a distributor. So when Nikon Australia started as a subsidiary in 2007, we did take over the distributor that was established. And so the mindset of a subsidiary reporting to a global head office or an independent distributor is quite different. We had a lot of legacy staff. We had people who'd been there for a long time who didn't want to change the way that they did things. Being part of a Japanese or multinational organisation, we had very strict corporate guidelines and restrictions around what we could do and what we couldn't do, how we could make change. And we have what I call the Great Divide. Our organisation structure was structured in two very, very distinct silos. We had the sales and marketing, and we had corporate services. And the Great Divide comes from the mindset of the two leaders of those divisions. They agreed on the financial goals to be achieved, but they really didn't agree on pretty much anything else and about how that was to be achieved. And their style and the way that they worked was complete opposites. And I call it the Great Divide, not only because of the silos of the structure, but in our physical environment, we had a wall running down, cutting the office in half. And we had sales and marketing on one side of the wall, and we had corporate on the other side. So not only was there a divide in attitudes and a divide in objectives and the way things were being done, the physical environment was not conducive to looking at how we improve productivity and engagement of all employees. It was also very lacking in representation of the global brand. And remember, the mandate really here was about making sure our employees were able to deliver the customer experience expected from a global prestige brand. And at that time, the Nikon Australia head office was in a very beige industrial building in the back blocks of Lidcombe in Sydney. It didn't look or feel or inspire the delivery of service of a global prestige brand. So we had challenges with our physical environment, with not only the location, the way it worked, and the barriers that it presented to looking at productivity and engagement. And then it's the capability of the people, systems and processes. So we had a lot of people who were very, very passionate about Nikon. They loved the product. They believed in the product. The problem with that is that they were very passionate, but they weren't necessarily capable in the roles that they were in. We had salespeople who were photographers, amazing photographers who loved the product, but they weren't salespeople. So we didn't have the right people in the right roles. We had great advocates for the business, but that didn't translate into productivity. We also had ineffective systems and processes that need to be implemented or changed to be able to become more effective. And as a Japanese company, we had a really strong focus on the figures. It was all about the numbers. In fact, we did quarterly rolling budgets. So we would finish one budget and we'd start the next quarterly budget process. So there was such a strong drive on results and figures and managing numbers, and almost no focus on managing people. So these were some of the internal roadblocks and challenges that really needed to be overcome to start to look at how we are able to change the level of productivity and engagement within the organisation. So no small feat when we look at those external factors and the internal roadblocks and challenges that we started. So when we looked at the strategic goals of the organisation, they were fairly similar to a lot of goals that we would see that are very common in most organisations. So improve profitability through sales, cost saving and effectiveness. So how are we actually going to improve profitability? We needed to increase market share across all categories, and we're in a declining market. Remember the impact of the smartphones that I mentioned earlier, particularly compact cameras. People stopped wanting to carry a telephone and a camera. Why would you take both when you could take a phone that has a camera in it? So we had declining market, but our strategic objective was to actually increase our market share in that declining market, which requires a lot of ingenuity around how we actually take product to market, what our messaging is. And in the environment, as I mentioned as well, where our retailers, our distribution partners were going through significant change in the way that they ordered product and distributed product, meant that we had to change rapidly in response and in support of the changes that our retailers were making. We had to deliver, the strategic goal was to deliver a customer experience aligned to global prestige brand, but our employee experience was so far removed from the type of experiences we wanted to deliver for our customers that it was a really big gap to look at how we would bridge. And going through all of these global changes in 2011 into 2012, there was question marks raised around, are we sustainable as a subsidiary? And if you look at the drop of the ocean of the Australian market and where we were in relation to Europe or the US market, organisations going through significant change quite often ask the question, do we continue to have operations in these areas, or do we go back to a distributor network? So we had to ensure our sustainability as a subsidiary in this difficult environment. So looking at those goals and the internal and external challenges, it was a really, I guess, a study in where do we start. And some of the things that we that I identified and worked with the organisation was that to drive productivity and engagement, to be able to deliver on these strategic goals, we needed to change behaviours, and we needed to change behaviours at all levels of the organisation. We needed to improve communication. At that point when I started, there were senior leader meetings, but there were no regular management meetings. There was no systems for flow of communication up or down throughout the business. We needed to change the level of interactions and the way decisions were made. So, because at that time, as I said, the business was very siloed and decision making was very restricted. And so it really limited the opportunity for employees to engage with innovation and to engage with the ability to make change and make suggestions and deliver a positive customer experience if they weren't enabled to make decisions and to have a high level of interaction across the business. We needed to look at the capability, passion and innovation within the organisation, the clarity of information and the information flow, where the roadblocks and challenges were. We needed an increased collaboration, and we also needed to celebrate the successes and focus on the positives that were happening in the business. As I said, there was so much focus on figures and outcomes that the impact of people and the engagement of the people within the business wasn't a focus. And as I'm sure you know, every business can only achieve results through the people within their business. And so it's really important to look at all of these things and the impact they have on productivity and engagement. The expectation from senior leaders was that changes would happen when we changed systems and processes and looked at compliance rather than looking at productivity and engagement. So there were some significant things there to be able to overcome. And just a quick snapshot of some of the things we did in these areas. So changing behaviours, we took it back to looking at what are the values. Now, traditionally, when I look at values as a culture consultant now, we work on how do we establish those, going back to purpose and vision and building values that are meaningful in the business. Within the environment we were in, we were not allowed to change the core competencies or the values that were developed from the Japanese organisation. So we needed still to use values as a basis for changing behaviours, but we needed to look at how we could creatively adapt the values we were given to make them relevant and to engage employees to understand what those behaviours, values-based behaviours, looked like. One of the things that I did fairly early on is to engage employees, was to think about what are people within our business passionate about? And it was photography and images and creativity. And so to help engage employees with our values, we ran a photography competition, engaged the marketing department to be able to loan a camera to every employee within Nikon Australia, to take the camera, to take photographs of what the values meant to them, to be able to then really connect with the meaning of the values and those values-based behaviours. And we gathered all the photographs up. It was a competition. We did select a photograph from employee photograph for each value. But we also then did a photo collage of all of the photos with the values. And when we moved location, we skinned a wall. And I've got a photo of that coming up, but we skinned a wall with all the employee photos and the values. So there was always that strong connection about the types of behaviours that represent the values. So we were limited with what we could do around creating values, but we didn't let that stop the impact and the importance of ensuring that behaviours were values-based. Communication-wise, we had to remove barriers and we need to plan comms. One of the biggest communication difficulties was the Japanese influence. We did have a Japanese expat managing director with very different communication styles, but I found one of the big barriers to communication is that we weren't all speaking the same language. And I don't mean Japanese and English. I mean, we weren't all understanding the language of the business, what the terminology meant, why the business needed us to be speaking in a certain way. And I found most importantly that we also, the leaders in the business, didn't understand the language of communication when it comes to engaging employees and talking about productivity and sharing a common values-based language. So there are a lot of barriers there that needed to be overcome. We needed to increase the type of communication, the frequency of communication, and how that worked within the business. We needed then to look at those interactions and decision making, and we needed to create frameworks and boundaries. So if you've watched my webinar from last week around optimizing organizational effectiveness, there's a real need to have a framework and boundaries around the things that we do, whether they're strategic boundaries, governance boundaries, risk boundaries. We need to actually be able to communicate to employees and everyone within the business around what's okay, what are the boundaries, where can you play in between those boundaries, and what will happen if you step outside that. When we looked at decision-making frameworks, it was very much about delegations and authorizations and enabling people to confidently be able to contribute and make decisions without having to stop and check confer with others. And so we started to make the interactions across the business and the decisions that could be made a lot easier and flow a lot smoother, which really had a strong flow-on effect when we started to look at that, delivering that customer experience. So looking at the capability, passion and innovation within the business required restructuring and recruiting. As I said, we had a lot of people when I started in the business, we had a lot of people who were incredibly passionate about Nikon, about the products. They loved the products. They could talk to anyone about a Nikon product all day. But when you're in a sales role, having a passion for a product doesn't necessarily equate to being able to negotiate and build relationships and be able to achieve the results required. So the passion needed to stay and remain, but we needed to strongly look at the capability within the business in internal roles and responsibilities, but also in response to the changes that were happening in the way that our customers were doing business and our retail distribution partners. We had to go from a structure where we had a lot of field sales staff who used to go out to stores and take orders to a change following that productivity commission into the retail industry, into a centralised ordering and distribution model from our biggest retail partners. So our structure had to change and respond to make sure that we remained productive and that we had the right people in the right roles. That also then impacted our recruiting, and recruiting is one of the most important elements of creating a culture, bringing people in who bring a sense of diversity and innovation and different thinking, but who have the passion for the purpose of your business and who demonstrate the right values. So those two elements of restructuring and recruiting were not only about responding to the needs of the business, but making sure we had the right people within the roles that we needed. Clarity and information flow. This was a big one that took time to develop because it was about transparency and trust, and comes back a lot to that communication, but building an environment where leaders who hadn't been transparent before trusted that sharing information and being open and honest about the way that the things were happening within the business took some time to build up. And I had to often go back to our global philosophy. So the global philosophy of Nikon was trustworthiness and creativity. And so drawing back on those global elements to be able to implement change within the business and demonstrate why clarity of information and information flow, building transparency and trust, and helping everyone understand it's not just flow information coming down through the business, but when there are problems arising, how quickly does information flow back up through the business without any fear of repercussions? And so clarity and information flow is an essential part of engaging employees to become more productive. We needed increased collaboration, and that was around shared goals. And we needed to celebrate success and focus on positives, which is around rewards and recognition, engagement activities. There is an activity or a program that we developed which ticked a whole lot of these boxes, which was called Outside the Yellow Square. So for those of you who know the Nikon logo, it is a yellow square. We wanted to be able to look at all of these elements around productivity and engagement in a way that was actually fun, delivered on our corporate social responsibility elements, improved understanding of the business, took into account cost savings and initiatives, creativity around initiatives, and really built the basis for strong collaboration and understanding across a geographically dispersed workforce. That was a program I'm not going to go into a lot of time or detail on right now because it takes some time. Happy to answer any questions about it, or if you want to contact me in future. But it was one that really had a strong and powerful impact in changing the way that we worked within the business. So how did all of these things actually improve productivity and engagement? And they certainly did. The reason, one of the things that we looked at is the measures for success. And these are some of the measures that I use now through Henry Reid as indicators of, are we being successful when we're changing productivity and engagement levels? We look at improving shareholder value, revenue dollars per full-time employees, employee engagement, productivity, innovation. But also with those improvements, we look at what are we reducing, the cost reductions, the reductions of employee turnover, absentee days, risks, claims cost. So with what I can share from this case study is that we did have significant improvements. So if I look at just a couple of those indicators in this case, the revenue dollars that were earned per full-time equivalent employee increased 54%. And this was over a 2-year period. We went from less than $1.5 million revenue per full-time equivalent employee to over $2.25 million per full-time equivalent employee. So that's the revenue number. What we did then, also looking at another impact on this, is that there was a full-time equivalent headcount decrease of 30%. And with that decrease comes a significant decrease in labour cost, and a lot of those other expenses which impact your profitability. So when you start to take a structured focus on looking at productivity engagement, but understanding the whole impact on organisational effectiveness, then you can see that there are significant impacts on the way on the way business is done. The insights that the things that I take away, I'm conscious we're sort of coming up at that 12:30 mark again already. The insights there that we take away is that culture design and culture change is not just an HR issue. When I started at Nikon, it was, here, you fix this, we're going to focus on these things. But culture design and culture change is a strategic issue. It's a business issue, and it should be used as a management tool to look at how can your organisation become more effective. It's really important that you focus on creating culture by design and not by default. I probably learnt that the focus on activity that I was involved with was not actually thinking about culture impact and creating it by design, which is an area that we focus on now because we can actually see how much more successful these impacts can be. One of the learnings that I had is that a change management approach is needed. In 2011, I didn't understand the significant impacts of making a change management approach with every different change, because even though we could change systems or processes or talk to people about the requirement to change behaviours, it wasn't engaging enough for them to understand the whole change journey. As I mentioned, speaking the business language is really important, and that is not just as HR professional to be able to understand how to speak the language of strategy and return on investment, but also to engage with leaders to be able to speak the language that's relevant to the culture that you're creating. Start to have words that are values-based to be able to then engage people through the way that you're communicating. One of the key insights for me too was to start working with leaders from day one. When we work with leaders from day one and work with them on understanding these potential impacts of culture, and work with them on their skills and their capability to lead and role model through these changes, rather than developing the changes or designing a culture or looking at these things in isolation and then looking at leader support. It just delays the process so much further. So leadership development, leadership capability and leadership role modelling from day one, combined with that speaking the same language, really helps shift things faster. Collaboration with experts is one that I've put in here because when I joined the global HR team with Nikon, we were collaborating with a large consulting company from the US and started to collaborate on a lot of issues that are already addressed in Nikon Australia. And in fact, a lot of the initiatives from Nikon Australia were taken up by the global HR team. We knew what we were doing as a global HR team, but the collaboration with experts gave us a different voice. And it gave us a lot more credibility to be able to get the buy-in of senior leaders and board members. So the collaboration with experts can be looking at the same problem from a different angle, but can also validate and drive forward the implementation of change. Key learning when we look at productivity and engagement too is that not everyone has to come on the change journey with you. When you are shifting a business or pivoting a business, it's not going to be the right thing for everyone to stay with the business, whether that's by their choice or by actually honestly assessing the needs of the business and managing that respectfully. Another key insight for me was that an engagement survey is not a comprehensive measure of culture. I used engagement surveys regularly, but there were gaps in the information that actually is required to pivot a business and to to impact productivity and employee engagement. So an engagement survey gives you some good insights on behaviours, but it's not enough as a comprehensive measure to shift culture, which is why we now do a culture audit, because it takes into consideration so many more elements that align to that framework of strategy, governance and risk. And the final insight is that it's always the right time to work on culture. This example talks about a time of extreme disruption, and we are in a time of extreme disruption right now. But it is always the right time to work on culture. Where it's particularly beneficial when we're going through a period of disruption as we are now is that things have been broken, things are changed. And when there's disruption or significant change, then it's an ideal time to be able to fix it differently, or to look at what has been highlighted as the things that may not be working or be optimal for supporting your business as you move forward into a new future state. So those things are really essential and part of the learnings from my time at Nikon, my Nikon case study. Does anyone have any questions? There's some questions we can add to the chat function. Just having a look now. Sorry, my chat function was closed during that. So let me just open that up and have a quick view to see if there are. Okay, so we have one here, which is, how do you see the Japanese organisation being the market leader, although they give priority to figures and process instead of human capital? Look, that's a real challenge, and it's a real challenge that became quite a roadblock for us as part of the global team. They are a market leader based on quality of product and systems and process, and rather than effective and efficient management of people and a focus on human capital. And that was a real roadblock for us. And I'd say it's a roadblock not only for a Japanese company, but for any company that doesn't value people, and that there is a lack of understanding, but particularly in a Japanese business where we're dealing with a very traditional company with a culture, a Japanese culture of not managing performance. So they still hadn't come to grasp with those terminologies. It's been a few years since I've worked with them. Is it the same now? I hope it's changed. I don't believe it's changed as much as it should. I believe for any organisation to change, the change needs to come from a board level, and there needs to be strong diversity at a board level and understanding of the impact for there to be change driven through an organisation, particularly a global organisation. Are there any other questions? All right. Look, that's the recording will be shared after this video. If you have any other questions, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer those. Our next webinar is going to be on the 3rd of June. Kelly has just put into the chat section there the link to book into that through Eventbrite, and it's going to explore in more detail assessing the impact of culture and that data-driven approach. So where I mentioned before, an engagement survey is not enough to really look at the impact of culture. We'll explain a little bit more about our process and all of those areas that can show you where the issues are that might expose your culture, and where to focus resources and improvement. So thank you very much everyone for joining today. If you have questions, please reach out and contact me. Very happy to connect and answer any other questions. And I hope that I see you at our webinar on the 3rd of June. Fantastic. Thank you.